Learner, I want you to imagine a really specific, um, a really high-stakes scenario for a second. Imagine you're holding a contract,
Okay, I'm picturing it.
but this isn't just any contract, right? It's a document that gives you the absolute legal, moral, and social right to entirely destroy the life of a person who has profoundly wronged you.
Oh, wow. Okay, so heavy stakes.
Exactly. Like, they ruined your reputation, they stole your security, they hurt your family, and society completely agrees with you. The courts agree with you.
You have total justification.
Total justification. The pen is literally in your hand, and all you have to do is sign your name to execute that destruction. But now, imagine taking that contract, looking the person dead in the eye, and tearing it into pieces.
That is, I mean, that's almost unthinkable.
Right. And you're not doing it because you're weak or because you're avoiding conflict. You're doing it as the ultimate undeniable flex of absolute power.
It's an almost incomprehensible level of psychological restraint, you know?
Yeah.
When we look at human history, our entire social infrastructure.
Like our justice systems and everything.
Yeah, exactly. Our justice systems, our tribal codes, our personal boundaries, it's all built around the precise tracking of debts and the execution of proportional revenge.
Tit for tat.
Right. The concept of willingly abandoning a justified retaliation, it goes against our deepest evolutionary survival instincts.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to a new deep dive, learner. Today, we're opening up this incredibly dense, profoundly challenging theological and linguistic treatise, and it's all centered on a single concept from the Islamic tradition.
The concept of alafu.
Yes, Alafu. It's one of the divine names of Allah, typically translated into English as the pardoner.
Yeah.
But our mission today goes so much further than just reading a religious dictionary.
Oh, absolutely. It's way deeper than that.
We're going to extract a highly sophisticated cytological framework for handling grudges, managing power, and confronting human fallibility. Because the scholars who spent their lives dissecting this concept, they weren't just mapping out how the divine treats humanity.
No, they were literally drafting a behavioral blueprint for how humanity is supposed to treat itself.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Set the scene for us.
So, picture the backdrop for our conversation today. Imagine an ancient, sunlit library, maybe somewhere in Andalusia or Damascus, right?
I can practically smell the old paper.
Yeah, the air is thick with the scent of old parchment. The
Yeah.
walls are lined floor to ceiling with these massive classical Arabic texts. And the source material we're dissecting today, it doesn't just list vocabulary words. It builds a bridge between root morphology, intense historical anecdotes, and what's really wild, early behavioral psychology.
It's a total paradigm shift.
It really is. It changes how we process the trauma of being wronged, how we conceptualize our own inevitable mistakes, and how we measure the true weight of the grudges we carry around with us.
Let's start right at the foundation then, pulling from the linguistic roots. Because I know classical lexicographers, like Ibn Faris, they spent decades tracking how words evolved in a harsh environment of the Arabian Peninsula.
Right, which was not an easy place to survive.
Not at all. And he maps out that the Arabic root word, afw, actually contains this fascinating duality. It means to leave something entirely, or to actively seek something out.
That's a really interesting tension right there in the root.
Yeah. And another monumental scholar, al-Jawhari, he expands on this duality by applying it to the moral and legal realm. So he defines it as leaving a sin without enacting the punishment.
But he doesn't stop at the legal definition, does he?
No, he grounds it in this really vivid natural metaphor. He uses the phrase afa alma, which translates to water that remains completely untouched by anything that muddies it.
Oh, I love that. Because if you analyze that metaphor through the lens of cognitive psychology, it is incredibly precise.
How so?
Well, Al-Jawhari isn't just talking about a puddle in the desert, you know? He's talking about the cognitive clarity of the human mind. Think about the mental state of holding a deep resentment.
It's exhausting.
It is, and we often describe it as feeling clouded or murky. The grievance is essentially a contaminant in your nervous system.
That makes total sense, like dropping mud into a clear spring.
Exactly. So when Al-Jawhari connects the concept of true pardon to undisturbed water, he's illustrating the psychological relief of extraction. The contaminant hasn't just been ignored, it's been entirely removed, allowing your cognitive waters to return to a state of total transparency.
So the distinction isn't just semantic, it's highly operational. which actually brings us to a massive differentiation in the source material. It's a distinction that essentially forms the architectural core of this entire framework.
The difference between Afu and Gafoor.
Right.
Yes.
The treatise makes this fierce, uncompromising distinction between Al-Afu the pardoner and another divine name, Al-Ghafur, which translates to the forgiving.
Which is tricky for us because in modern colloquial English, we just throw pardon and forgive around as absolute synonyms.
We do. We use them interchangeably in apologies all the time. But in this classical Arabic framework, treating them as synonyms is a fundamental error. They are completely different mechanisms.
Right. The linguistic scholar Al-Kafawi isolates the operational difference beautifully. He notes that the concept of Gafoor forgiveness is built around a root concept called sit.
Sit. What does that literally mean?
It means to cover, to conceal, or to drape a veil over a sin or a mistake, and to drop the act of punishment for it.
Okay, so you're throwing a blanket over it.
Exactly. But a few pardon is built around an entirely different mechanism called ma. And ma means absolute, unmitigated erasure.
Erasure. Wow.
Yeah, it is the effacing of the thing until absolutely no trace remains.
I want to translate this into a modern technological reality for the learner, just so we can really grasp the weight of this difference. Think about how a computer hard drive works.
Okay, I'm with you.
Gafoor forgiveness is like taking a highly corrupted, malicious file and dragging it into a hidden quarantine folder on your desktop.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right, because the file can't execute its malicious code anymore.
Yeah.
You aren't being actively penalized by it. It's hidden from your daily view. But, and this is the key, it is still taking up memory. It still exists on the physical disk.
The data is still there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But part of that is a cryptographic military-grade wipe of that sector of the hard drive.
Yes. The ones and zeros are completely overwritten.
Overwritten. The file doesn't just lose its power, it ceases to exist in the architecture of the machine. The processing power it was holding hostage is completely returned to the system.
What's fascinating here is that it is. And Al-Kafawi also points out a critical theological boundary here. Gafoor, this cosmic covering, is an action exclusive to the divine. It's a proprietary intervention reserved for believers, and it yields a subsequent reward.
Okay, so only God can do Gafoor.
Right. But this radical erasure, this dropping of blame, is an action that humans are actually capable of executing. We cannot grant divine forgiveness, but we can practice off with each other.
We can choose to securely wipe the hard drive.
Uh-huh.
But, I have to push back on this a little bit. Because analyzing this from a sociological perspective, it sounds incredibly dangerous.
No, so?
Well, if Afu means total erasure, dropping the blame entirely so the internal water is undisturbed, it sounds like a recipe for becoming a chronic victim. It sounds passive.
I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, like if someone embezzles from my company or systematically lies to me, and I just execute a military-grade wipe of the ledger, society looks at me and says I lack self-respect. It sounds like I'm merely enabling a predator.
And that is the default assumption of modern individualistic psychology, right? We often conflate forgiveness with a complete lack of boundaries. We assume that if you don't punish someone, it's only because you can't.
Exactly. You're just a doormat.
But the classical scholars preempt this exact critique. They argue that the concept of Afu is inextricably bound to the presence of absolute power. It is not a passive submission to injury. It is a hyperactive, fiercely deliberate assertion of agency.
I actually noticed the text highlights a very subtle structural detail in the Quran to prove this point. It points out that the name Al-Afu is paired with Al-Ghafur the Forgiving 4 times.
Right.
But it's paired with the name Al-Qadir, which translates to the capable or the all-powerful exactly once.
Yeah.
And that singular pairing happens in Surah An-Nisa, verse 149.
The architecture of that specific pairing unlocks the psychology of the entire paradigm. The scholarly consensus dictates that a praiseworthy, spiritually elevated pardon only exists when the person pardoning possesses the unmitigated capability to extract revenge.
Wait, so you have to be able to destroy them for it to count?
Yes. If you're wronged, but you lack the physical strength, the social capital, the financial leverage, or the legal standing to retaliate, and you just fold your hands and declare, "I pardon you," the scholars argue that this is not off.
What is then?
It is merely helplessness masquerading as moral superiority. You aren't taking the high road. You are simply trapped in the valley, pretending you prefer the view.
Wow. That is a brutal assessment of human ego.
It cuts right through the self-deception, doesn't it?
It really does. So true Af requires the legitimate option of destruction. You have to be holding the loaded weapon, have the target in your sights, have the legal justification to pull the trigger, and then actively choose to dismantle the weapon instead.
Precisely. The theological argument is that Allah's pardon is born of ultimate power and infinite capability. He is perfectly capable of exacting immediate, precise, and devastating justice, yet actively chooses the path of erasure.
So to emulate that,
For a human being to truly embody this trait and practice AFTO, they must be operating from a position of leverage.
if you map that onto the psychology of everyday human interactions, learner, it rings incredibly true. Think about the most profound life-altering apologies or pardons we witness in the corporate world, in politics, or even in our own family dynamics.
They invariably come from individuals who hold all the cards.
Always. Imagine a scenario where an executive catches a subordinate in a massive, fireable breach of protocol. The executive has the HR documentation finalized, the legal team's blessing, and the absolute justification to ruin this person's career.
The paperwork is ready to go.
Exactly. But instead, the executive calls them in, puts the file right through the shredder in front of them and says, "We're erasing this. Your slate is clean. Get back to work."
The psychological impact on that subordinate would be seismic.
It bypasses fear entirely and breeds a level of transformational loyalty that punitive measures could never, ever achieve. That is the flex of Alpha W.
It alters the power dynamic by demonstrating that the executive's authority is so deeply entrenched that they do not even need to exercise their right to violence, whether corporate, social, or physical, to maintain their status.
That's a profound way to look at power.
It is. But there is a shadow side to this. The treatise pivots from defining the term to analyzing its behavioral impacts on the human psyche. And the second impact it details is actually a stern warning about the moral hazard of absolute pardon.
Right, because if you introduce the concept of an infinitely powerful entity that is willing to execute a total erasure of sins, basically a cosmic blank slate, you immediately incentivize moral laziness.
Human nature loves a loophole.
We do. The scholar Ibn al-Qayyim issues a searing critique of human nature right here. He observes that ignorant individuals rely way too heavily on this divine generosity. They look at the a few nature of the divine and treat it like a limitless credit card.
Just swiping it constantly.
Exactly, swiping the cosmic card. They completely neglect ethical commands, abandon moral rigor, and just forget that consequences are still a functional reality of the universe.
To codify how catastrophic this mindset is, the scholars introduce a chilling psychological and theological concept called istidraj.
Istidraj. Break down the morphology of that term for us. What does it mean?
It translates roughly to a gradual luring, a step-by-step descent, or being drawn imperceptibly into a profound delusion.
That sounds ominous.
It is deeply ominous. The source material cites a prophetic tradition that strips away any ambiguity regarding this concept. It states, if you observe the divine granting a person everything they desperately desire in this material world, vast wealth, unimpeachable health, high social status, endless comfort, while that person is persistently, arrogantly, and systematically engaging in corruption or sin.
You are not witnessing a blessing.
Exactly. You are witnessing istidraj. They are being methodically drawn into a false sense of absolute security.
Learner, here's where it gets really interesting, because this ancient concept operates as a direct, lethal strike against the foundational assumptions of modern hustle culture and the prosperity gospel.
Oh, absolutely. It turns the whole thing upside down.
Right. In our current socioeconomic paradigm, we have internalized a highly toxic equation. Material success is the ultimate proof of moral correctness.
If you're rich, God must love you.
Yes. If a CEO is ruthlessly exploiting workers, destroying competitors through underhanded tactics, but their company valuation hits $1 billion, society looks at them and implicitly assumes, well, the universe is rewarding them. They must be doing something fundamentally right.
But istidraj completely shatters that equation. It states explicitly that material success is mathematically divorced from moral standing.
It goes even further than a simple divorce, though. The treatise references another tradition stating that God dispenses worldly provisions, money, power, health, to those he loves and to those he actively despises.
Wealth is a completely neutral variable. It is not a metric of divine endorsement whatsoever.
However, the text specifies that he only grants deen, which encompasses faith, moral clarity, ethical grounding, and spiritual insight to those he actually loves.
I think we need to let that sit for a moment. Just think about how deeply our own psychology is infected by the opposite assumption.
Oh, we all do it.
When we act unethically, when we lie on a tax return, when we manipulate a colleague, when we betray a confidence, and the immediate consequence isn't punishment, but rather a promotion or a financial windfall, what does our ego do?
Our ego instantly interprets that delayed consequence as a cosmic validation. We tell ourselves, I cheated the system and I won. Therefore, the system doesn't care about cheating.
That cognitive leap is the precise definition of istidraj. The human brain misinterprets the delay of justice as the absence of justice.
Wow.
You are being lulled into a deep narcotic sleep by your own unchecked success. The rope is merely being let out further and further, giving you the illusion of free movement right up until the very moment it snaps violently taut.
That is a terrifying visual. So if istidraj is the catastrophic trap of taking pardon for granted, of treating this divine erasure as a blank check for corruption, what's the antidote? How does the framework suggest a human being actually earns the right to have their own ledger wiped clean?
The framework is unapologetically transactional in this regard. It posits that you earn the erasure of your own monumental failures by actively giving that exact same erasure to others,
Especially when it's hard.
particularly when it is most difficult to do so.
Which brings us to the third behavioral impact outlined in the text: radical empathy and the pursuit of the reward of afdio. The scholars argue that practicing pardon generates worldly dignity and immense spiritual return.
And to prove this, they don't rely on abstract theory. They anchor it in what I consider to be one of the most emotionally devastating, high-stakes sociological case studies in the entire classical corpus.
The narrative of Abu Bakr and Mista.
Yes. To understand the weight of this narrative, we really have to meticulously reconstruct the socio-political architecture of 7th century Medina.
Give us the context. Who was Abu Bakr in this society?
Abu Bakr was not just any citizen. He was the most intimate companion of the Prophet Muhammad, a man of staggering social standing, immense wealth, and unimpeachable character. He utilized his wealth to support a vast network of dependents.
And Mista was one of them?
Exactly. Mista was a poor relative who relied entirely on Abu Bakr for his economic survival.
Okay, so the stakes are already heavily skewed. You have a wealthy benefactor and a highly vulnerable dependent. But then a crisis erupts that threatens the entire social fabric of their community.
A catastrophic crisis.
A highly coordinated, vicious slander is engineered against Abu Bakr's own daughter, Aisha, who also happens to be the wife of the Prophet.
Which escalates the situation exponentially.
Right. In the context of a tribal honor culture, this wasn't just idle gossip. This was a targeted assassination of her honor, her family's political standing, and the legitimacy of the Prophet's household. It was a literal existential threat.
Because honor in that society was not merely a feeling of pride. It was the absolute currency of physical and social security. To attack Aisha's honor was to invite violence and social exile.
Exactly. And the devastating, deeply intimate betrayal at the center of this crisis. Mr. The very man who eats food bought by Abu Bakr, who sleeps under a roof provided by Abu Bakr, he actively participates in spreading this slander.
It's just sickening to think about.
He joins the mob that is enthusiastically dragging his benefactor's daughter through the sociological mud.
The psychology of that betrayal is staggering. It is a multi-layered violation. It's a breach of familial loyalty, a breach of tribal solidarity, and a profound violation of the unspoken contract between benefactor and dependent. Mista didn't just bite the hand that fed him.
He attempted to sever it entirely.
Yes. So let's look at Abu Bakr's reaction when the dust finally settles. Eventually, the truth is laid bare, the slander is definitively exposed as a complete lie, and Aisha is entirely exonerated.
And Abu Bakr is furious.
He is absolutely furious. His reaction is intensely relatably human. He executes a perfectly justified boundary-setting maneuver. He swears a binding oath declaring, I will never spend another dirham on Mista.
He completely severs the financial lifeline. And frankly, learner, if you presented this scenario to any modern conflict resolution specialist or therapist today, they would applaud him. They would say, you identified a toxic, abusive presence in your life and you cut them off. That is healthy self-preservation.
Oh, 100%. By the metric of pure baseline justice, Abu Bakr was operating flawlessly. Mista broke the contract. Abu Bakr terminated the benefits. It is perfectly proportional.
The framework of Afwa demands more than baseline justice.
It demands something radical.
The treatise highlights a moment of profound divine intervention here. A verse of the Quran is revealed specifically to address this shattered relationship. It's located in Surah An-Nur, verse 22.
And what does it say?
It directly addresses people of virtue and wealth, urging them not to swear oaths, preventing them from assisting their relatives or the poor, regardless of the personal injury they have suffered. And the verse concludes with what might be the most penetrating rhetorical question in the entire theological canon.
Do you not love that Allah should forgive you?
Do you not love that Allah should forgive you? The psychological impact of that single question on Abu Bakr is immediate and total.
He doesn't even hesitate.
No. The historical record states that the moment he heard it, he broke down and wept. He didn't mount a defense. He didn't say, "But you don't understand the depth of the trauma he caused my daughter. You don't understand the humiliation."
His response was immediate submission to the logic of the transaction.
He said, "Yes, by Allah, we love that you forgive us." And he instantly, unconditionally restored Mista's financial support.
He didn't just restore it, he swore an oath that he would never sever it again. He reverted the relationship to its original unblemished state. He enacted Ma, he wiped the hard drive.
This is the ultimate put your money where your mouth is philosophy. The text is holding up a terrifying mirror to the human ego here. It's essentially saying, you are a flawed, arrogant, deeply imperfect creature who generates a massive ledger of secret sins over a lifetime.
And you desperately want the divine creator to execute a military-grade wipe of your ledger. You want total erasure.
Exactly. If you demand that level of radical grace for yourself, you must be willing to execute that exact same erasure for the flawed, arrogant, deeply imperfect human being sitting across from you, even when the betrayal is intimate, even when they absolutely do not deserve it.
It establishes a terrifying proportionality. Your capacity to receive afflow is directly indexed to your capacity to dispense it. If you hoard your grievances, you are effectively asking the universe to hoard yours.
I can practically hear the learner interjecting here with a very logical escalation, though.
The obvious what if.
Yeah. Okay, financial support after a reputational attack is one thing. That deals with money and words. But what happens when the offense breaches the physical realm? What happens when the grievance involves physical violence, warfare, or murder? Does this framework still hold up under the pressure of blood?
It's the ultimate stress test for the philosophy.
To answer that, the scholars transition into what I can only describe as masterclasses in impossible restraint.
The treatise curates a sequence of historical events from the life of the Prophet Muhammad, specifically designed to test the absolute limits of this framework under the most extreme physiological and psychological duress imaginable.
Let's analyze these events because they escalate in intensity really fast.
Yeah.
The first involves a man named Garath. The geopolitical context is a state of active, lethal hostility.
Active warfare.
Yes. The prophet is resting alone under a tree, physically separated from his companions and completely vulnerable. Garath, an enemy combatant, stalks him, draws his sword, stands over the sleeping prophet, wakes him, and demands, "Who will protect you from me?"
Just an incredibly terrifying moment.
The prophet, displaying extraordinary psychological grounding, simply replies, "Allah." And then a sudden shift occurs. Whether through sheer intimidation, a momentary lapse in focus, or divine intervention, Garath drops the sword.
And the tables turn completely.
Instantly. The prophet immediately seizes it, stands over his would-be assassin, and mirrors the exact question back. "Who will protect you from me?" The power dynamic is completely inverted in a matter of seconds.
Analyze the cognitive dissonance Garath must be experiencing in that fraction of a second. He's a combatant who just attempted a brazen assassination. By every law of tribal warfare, military engagement, and basic self-defense, his execution is not just justified, it is required.
It's expected.
Right. The prophet possesses absolute power and absolute justification. Yet, what is the executive decision? He lets Garath walk away.
He executes an afko, total erasure of the incident. But the second scenario scales up the physical stakes even more. After the conquest of Khaybar, a Jewish woman serves the prophet a roasted sheep that she has deliberately laced with a lethal poison.
So this is biological warfare, essentially.
Basically, yeah. And he consumes a portion of it before realizing the deception. This wasn't a near miss. The poison fundamentally damaged his physiology, causing chronic pain and complications for the rest of his life.
It did permanent harm.
The woman is apprehended and brought before him. She confesses.
Again, we are looking at an assassination attempt, but this one was successful in causing permanent physical harm. The prophet is acting as the head of state. The woman is a vanquished enemy who utilized chemical warfare.
The political and legal machinery dictates immediate execution.
Yet, regarding his own personal right to retaliation for the poisoning of his body, he categorically forbids her execution.
He actively suppresses the machinery of state vengeance. And then we reach the macro level, the conquest of Mecca. We have to understand the decades of trauma leading up to this moment.
It was decades of absolute brutality.
The Meccans weren't just political rivals. They systematically tortured the early believers, murdered the weak, enacted a devastating economic boycott that forced the Prophet's family to eat leaves and leather just to survive, and waged a relentless military campaign against him for over a decade.
They tried to erase his community from existence.
Exactly. But finally, the tide turns. The Prophet marches into Mecca with an overwhelming, unstoppable military force. The city surrenders. The architects of his suffering are gathered before him, entirely at his mercy.
The psychological temptation to unleash a bloodbath, to just balance the historical ledger right then and there, would be overwhelming for any military conqueror in history. It's the moment every displaced, oppressed group dreams of.
But he stands before the assembled elites of Mecca and issues a blanket statement. Go, you are free. No military tribunals, no reparations, no systematic revenge. A total societal-level execution of Astri.
It is staggering to contemplate. But the scholars intentionally slow the pace of the text down here to focus on one highly specific, profoundly intimate story that complicates everything we've just discussed.
It's the narrative of a man named Washi. And this is where the framework proves it isn't just some idealistic utopian fantasy. It wrestles with the darkest depths of human grief.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, the story of Washi explores the absolute boundary of what a human heart can endure without shattering entirely.
What happened?
During the devastating Battle of Uhud, Washi was the spearman who killed Hamza, and Hamza was the Prophet's beloved uncle. But the trauma didn't end with a battlefield casualty. The historical accounts detail that Hamza's body was subjected to horrific, grotesque mutilation by the enemy after he fell.
And the source material is completely unsparing in its description of the Prophet's reaction to this. When he discovers his uncle's desecrated body on the battlefield, his response is not a serene, detached display of stoicism.
Not at all.
He is engulfed by a sheer, visceral, blinding grief. He is so utterly devastated that he breaks his usual composure and vows a vastly disproportionate retaliation. He swears that in return for this singular atrocity, he will mutilate 70 of their men.
It is a moment of raw, terrifying human rage.
It really is.
It proves that the capacity for off does not mean an absence of emotion. He was pushed to the absolute psychological brink. However, divine intervention acts as an immediate constraint. A revelation descends, dictating the strict laws of proportionality. If you must retaliate, the retaliation can only be exactly equal to the injury suffered.
Why?
But, the revelation adds, choosing patience is vastly superior. Constrained by this divine directive, he swallows the burning grief. He abandons the vow. He does not execute the 70.
Now we fast forward several years, the geopolitical landscape has shifted entirely. Mecca is conquered, the old regime is dismantled. Washi, fully aware that he is the man who murdered and mutilated the most beloved relative of the new undisputed ruler of Arabia, well, initially he attempts to flee.
He knows he's a dead man walking.
He does. But as the borders close, he realizes flight is futile. He makes a desperate calculation. He returns to Mecca, decides to embrace Islam, and walks directly into the Prophet's gathering to seek a pardon face to face.
Imagine the tension in that room. The man who caused the deepest psychological wound in the Prophet's life is sitting an arm's length away, asking for his ledger to be wiped clean.
You could hear a pin drop.
The Prophet asks him to recount exactly how he killed Hamza. Washi tells the brutal story. And the Prophet, bound by his own framework of afdu, accepts the conversion. He grants the pardon. He guarantees Washi's physical and spiritual safety.
The hard drive is wiped.
The hard drive is wiped.
But the text includes a detail that absolutely leveled me when I read it. It is the most painfully authentic human detail in the entire treatise. After granting the pardon, securing Washi's life, and erasing the debt of blood, the Prophet looks at him and issues a caveat.
Yeah.
He says, "Woe to you, hide your face from me so that I do not see you."
Hide your face from me.
And the historical record notes that for the remainder of the Prophet's life, Washi would actively hide behind pillars or tents to ensure he never crossed the Prophet's line of sight.
Yeah. That single sentence, hide your face from me, is the psychological linchpin of this entire philosophy. It provides profound validation for the reality of trauma.
It really does.
True felt the deliberate erasure of the desire for revenge, the cancellation of the punishment, does not require the erasure of your own physiological trauma. It does not mandate emotional amnesia.
This is such a critical intervention in how we discuss forgiveness today, learner. When people hear the word forgive, They often interpret it as a command to suppress their pain, to invite their abuser back into their home, to pretend the violation never occurs.
Forgive and forget, right?
Right. They think it means we have to be best friends now. And because that feels impossible and profoundly unsafe, they reject the concept of forgiveness entirely.
The prophet's interaction with Washi dismantles that toxic expectation. He executed the legal and spiritual pardon. He saved Washi's life and soul, but he simultaneously honored the profound reality of his own grief.
He set a boundary.
He established an uncompromising boundary. He effectively said, I have erased your debt, but the visual stimulus of your face triggers the physiological trauma of my uncle's mutilated body. For my own well-being, you must maintain your distance.
It is the ultimate synthesis of grace and psychological self-preservation. You are not required to invite the person who broke you to dinner. You are not required to trust them with your vulnerability ever again. You are only required to stop actively seeking their destruction.
You drop the ledger, you
Yeah.
maintain the boundary.
Exactly. But if we accept that holding a grudge is spiritually and psychologically damaging, and that executing afe is the ideal response, the logical next question is mechanical.
The how-to.
Right. How do you actually extract that malice from your nervous system? Because we all know that pardon is not a light switch you can simply flick on. You can say, I pardon you out loud, but your heart rate still spikes, and your hands still shake when you think of the person.
The scholars recognize this disconnect entirely, and the treatise transitions into providing a highly specific practical toolkit for achieving a clean heart. They understand that afa requires active mechanics to remove what the text calls wahar as-sadr.
Wahar as-sadr. It is a brilliant piece of anatomical linguistics. It translates to the hatred, malice, or the literal burning grudge located in the chest.
It perfectly captures the physiological reality of resentment. The tightness in the sternum, the shallow breathing, the cascade of cortisol and adrenaline when your sympathetic nervous system is triggered by a memory of betrayal.
It's physical. The framework provides surprisingly concrete physical actions to dissipate that burning sensation. The first mechanic it suggests is the exchange of gifts.
Yes.
The text references a tradition stating, exchange gifts, for the gift removes the wahar of the chest.
From a behavioral science perspective, this is a masterclass in forced cognitive dissonance. When you despise someone, your brain builds a rigid narrative of their villainy. If you force yourself to purchase a gift and hand it to them, you are forcing your physical body to execute an action that directly contradicts your emotional state.
Your brain can't handle the contradiction.
No, it struggles to hold two conflicting realities. I hate this person, and I am providing for this person. Very often, the rigid narrative of hatred cracks first under the pressure of the benevolent action.
The second mechanic is even more deeply rooted in physiology. The text recommends fasting 3 days a month, framing it not just as an act of piety, but as a specific biological reset designed to remove the waha from the chest.
The neurobiology behind this is fascinating. When you engage in caloric restriction, you force the body out of its default metabolic state. Fasting downregulates the production of certain excitatory neurotransmitters. It lowers baseline insulin and cortisol.
So it calms the system down.
Essentially, by denying the physical ego its fundamental fuel, food and water, you initiate a parasympathetic state that starves the emotional ego of the chemical energy it requires to sustain chronic, high-intensity anger. You are biologically lowering your emotional reactivity.
To illustrate how these mechanics manifest in daily life, the text includes the narrative of Abdullah bin Amr and the man of paradise. And I love this story because it subverts every expectation we have about what makes a person spiritually elite.
It's my favorite anecdote in the treatise.
So Abdullah bin Amr is sitting in the mosque with the Prophet, who points to a man walking through the door and announces, "A man from the people of paradise is going to appear now." This profound endorsement happens 3 days in a row, and it is the exact same seemingly ordinary man every single time.
Abdullah bin Amr, who is known for his intense, exhausting dedication to prayer and fasting, is understandably obsessed. He wants to uncover the secret formula.
He assumes this man must be engaging in superhuman feats of nocturnal worship. So Abdullah fabricates an excuse, claiming he had a dispute with his father, and asks to stay at this man's house for 3 nights.
He essentially embeds himself to conduct a covert audit of the man's spirituality. He stays awake, watching the guy like a hawk.
But the reveal is incredibly anticlimactic. The text notes that the man simply went to sleep. If he rolled over in the night, he might mutter a brief remembrance of God, but he didn't leave out of bed for hours of grueling prayer. He lived a completely normal, unremarkable baseline existence.
After 3 days of mounting confusion, Abdullah confesses the surveillance. He admits there was no fight with his father and asks point blank, I watched you, and you don't actually do that much. What hidden action earned you that ultimate title?
And the man replies, "It is nothing but what you saw, except that I do not find in my soul any deception against any Muslim, nor do I envy anyone for the good God has given them." So let's process this. This man essentially achieved the highest possible spiritual ranking simply by possessing the ability to go to sleep without actively running a mental audit of his grievances. He didn't hold a grudge, and that outranked a lifetime of extreme physical, calorie-burning worship.
The scholars assert that it absolutely does, because physical worship can very easily become a vehicle for the ego. You can pray all night and become intensely arrogant about your own piety.
Right.
But cleansing the heart of envy, malice, and the desire for revenge requires the total agonizing subjugation of the ego. It is infinitely harder to forgive a slight than it is to skip a meal. Ibn al-Qayyim, the primary voice in this treatise, outlines the ultimate cognitive filter for achieving this state. We can call it transactional empathy.
How does he define transactional empathy?
He instructs the reader to intentionally recall their own most humiliating, deeply hidden secret sins, the actions you are terrified of anyone discovering. He says to sit with the fear of those consequences. Then mandate that you will treat the people who wrong you exactly how you are begging the divine to treat your secret sins.
That's a brutal mirror.
It is. If you want the divine to publicly expose your failures, then go ahead and expose your brother's failures. If you want the divine to obsessively track your ledger, hold on to theirs. But if you want the divine to execute a total wipe of your hard drive, you must immediately wipe theirs.
The treatise explicitly states that this specific mental exercise severs the influence of Satan. It describes Satan's primary tactic not as inciting you to commit massive cinematic crimes, but rather trapping you in loops of obsessive rumination over petty slights.
He said this specific word, she looked at me with this specific expression, they deliberately ignored my email.
Exactly. That microscopic obsession with your own victimhood keeps your internal water perpetually muddy. Transactional empathy acts as the ultimate circuit breaker for that rumination loop.
It stops the default mode network in your brain from spinning out of control. It forces you to realize that the stakes are simply too high. Your desperate need for cosmic vastly outweighs your petty need to be proven right in a localized dispute.
But as comprehensive as this framework is, I have to raise one final crucial objection on behalf of the learner.
Let's hear it.
If this framework constantly demands radical grace, if it constantly tells me to drop my right to revenge to secure my own pardon, does this theology require me to be a pacifist doormat? Is it fundamentally forbidden to seek justice when I am wronged?
That is the most important caveat in the entire framework, and the scholars dedicate the final sections to clarifying this exact boundary. The text does not mandate pacifism.
Okay, good.
In fact, it explicitly praises individuals who stand up to abuse. It cites Surah Ashura, verse 39, which elevates those who, when tyranny strikes them, they defend themselves.
So active self-defense against tyranny is considered a virtue, not a failure of us.
Exactly. To codify this, Ibn al-Qayyim breaks down the human response to injury into 3 distinct hierarchical levels. This is the operational matrix of the entire philosophy.
Let's define the matrix. What is the baseline level?
The first level is justice, termed adl in Arabic. This level is explicitly allowed and forms the absolute basis of a functional society. It is defined as punishing an evil with an exactly equal evil.
Meaning proportional response.
Right. If a person shatters your window, you have the absolute legal and moral right to force them to pay for a new window. If a person slanders your business, you have the right to legally compel a retraction. It is equal retribution, executed without lying or exceeding the bounds of the original injury.
Okay, so ADL ensures you are never forced to be a victim. You have the right to balance the scale. What is the second level?
The second level is grace, termed fadl or afto. This is highly recommended. This occurs when you possess the full capability to execute adl. You can easily force them to pay for the window, but you actively choose to absorb the cost yourself, erase the ledger, and preserve the relationship.
So you have the power, but you choose not to use it.
Yes. The scholars argue that while justice balances the earthly scale, grace unlocks an infinite, unspecified reward from the divine.
And the third level?
The third level is injustice, termed zulm. This is categorically forbidden. This occurs when you use an injury as an excuse to inflict disproportionate revenge. Someone breaks your window, so you burn their entire house to the ground.
Or someone insults you in a meeting, so you dedicate years to destroying their career.
Exactly. You transform from the victim into the tyrant.
So what does this all mean for the learner navigating complex relationships today? I synthesize this as a brilliantly pragmatic philosophy. It refuses to spiritually gaslight you. It never says that your anger isn't justified.
It validates the anger completely.
It legally validates your right to seek justice. If you need to take an abuser to court, you take them to court. Adult is your right. But it continually points upward, reminding you that while justice makes you even with your oppressor, elevates you completely out of their orbit and aligns you with the divine standard.
That elevation is the ultimate goal of the tradition. The treatise concludes by examining the linguistic choices in the supplications of the Prophet Muhammad during the most critical moments of the year.
Like Laylat al-Qadr.
Yes, Laylat al-Qadr, the holiest night in the Islamic calendar, the night where destinies are said to be written. His wife Aisha asked him for the single best prayer to recite. He didn't instruct her to ask for the destruction of her enemies or for vast empires or even for specific worldly justice.
He instructed her to focus the entirety of her spiritual energy on one phrase. O Allah, you are Allah few, you love pardon, so pardon me.
Yes, and in a corroborating tradition, a man approaches the prophet twice, asking for the single best thing to request from God. The prophet replies, "Ask Allah for af and afia in this world and the hereafter."
Afia. What does that mean in this context?
Afia is a comprehensive term that translates to total well-being, physical health, mental clarity, emotional stability, and protection from paralyzing affliction.
Look at the synergy between those two words, learner. If you are granted Afiyu, your cosmic ledger is wiped entirely clean. The hard drive is secure. And if you have Afia, your mind and body are functioning in a state of tranquil health.
You're untouchable, essentially.
The scholars are arguing that if you possess those two elements, you have essentially won the lottery of human existence. You are no longer dragging the exhausting, crushing weight of historical grievances, and you are no longer planning the logistics of future revenge.
You are free.
You are free. Learner, this has been an incredible journey through the depths of human psychology. To summarize our dive, off is not the weak act of turning a blind eye. It is the hyper-powerful, deliberate erasure of a grudge. It requires the capacity for retaliation, making it a trait born of absolute strength.
It protects us from Istidraj.
It is the ultimate defense mechanism against the terrifying delusion of Istidraj, where we mistakenly equate our bank accounts with our moral standing. And most importantly, it places a heavy demand on us to extend the exact same radical grace to the flawed people in our lives that we desperately hope the universe will extend to us, even if that means setting a boundary to protect our own trauma.
As we close the books on this ancient library, I want to leave you with a final thought to analyze, learner. Drawing deeply on Al-Jauhari's original metaphor of the undisturbed water. We expend massive amounts of cognitive and emotional energy meticulously tracking the wrongs done to us. We gather the mud, we catalog the slights, and we clutch our ledgers tightly against our chests, convinced that this record-keeping is a shield that will protect us from future harm.
We really do believe the grudge keeps us safe.
We do. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if the very ledgers we are hoarding for protection are the heavy stones dragging us underwater, actively preventing us from experiencing the afia, that total lightness of mind and well-being that we are constantly praying to achieve? What if the ultimate flex of power isn't in holding the debt over someone's head, but in having the courage to burn the ledger entirely?
Burning the ledger entirely to reclaim your own mind. Learner, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of forgiveness. Stay fiercely analytical, carefully examine the ledgers you've been hoarding, and as always, keep exploring the depths of knowledge. We'll see you next time.